Welcome, and thank you for joining our webinar today. Privileged passwords are easy pickings for attackers unless you make these fixes. Our guest speaker today is SANS faculty fellow and industry-recognized security expert, Dr. Eric Cole. We're super excited to have him here today. You are also joined by BeyondTrust product manager, Martin Kennard, who will run us through an overview and demo of BeyondTrust PowerBroker Password Safe after Dr. Cole's portion, so please stick around for that. My name is Sarah, your webinar host today. A reminder to please submit your questions via the GoToMeeting console anytime throughout the webinar, and we'll cover your questions at the end during our Q&A time. Also, today's session is being recorded. You'll receive a follow-up email containing links to the recording and the slides shown here today within about 1 to 2 business days from now. The slides can also be immediately downloaded via the handout section in the GoToWebinar console. Additionally, we now offer CPE credits through ISACA. So if you are attending for CPE credits and have an ISACA account, you can download the attendance verification document in the handout section now, and then submit proof that you attended today's session directly to ISACA. So at this point, let's hand it on over to Eric, who's going to jump right in. Welcome to the line, Doctor.
Thank you for having me, and always a pleasure to be here and talk about.
Thank you for being here today, too.
And get to talk about one of everyone's favorite topics, passwords. I tell you, I was recently at a keynote, and one of the questions I got asked is, Eric, what is one of the biggest threats? What is one of the biggest areas that organizations fail that allow adversaries to compromise and cause harm? And I went through all the different scenarios I've worked on, and I'm like, you know something? It's passwords. It's privileged accounts and passwords that are just not being controlled, not being tracked, and not being protected. And their response was, yeah, but we want something cooler. We want something like zero-day exploits or advanced buffer overflow attacks or things like that. And the reality is they are just not being used with high frequency. So if you really want to focus in on winning and not making it easy for the adversary and go in and protect your organization, spend some time to look at how you can better control, manage, and protect those passwords, because that is the big issue. And I sort of joke, I never thought, if you went back when I started my career 30 years ago, and one of the big problems 30 years ago was password problems, not protecting passwords, giving away passwords, not securing them. And if you told me 30 years later we'd still be talking about them, I'd probably go, you're a little crazy. Now, in hindsight, with how things have evolved, it's no surprise that passwords are back on the radar. If we were dealing with internal data centers and internal networks and everything was controlled and managed internally with minimal to no accessibility to the internet, then passwords probably wouldn't be that big a problem. However, with the cloud, with everything moving to anywhere, anyplace, anytime internet access, now all of a sudden passwords have taken on a whole new importance. Let's just look at a scenario. What do you need to access work email? What do you need to access your bank account? What do you need to access sensitive documents? Basically, you need a computer with a web browser, with internet access, a user ID, and a password. That's it. Now, question, don't attackers have computers? Don't attackers have web browsers? Don't attackers have internet access? The only thing that you have that the attacker does not have is that password. So as more and more services move to the cloud, as we're doing more e-commerce, online banking, and other services like that, all of a sudden passwords are, in many cases, not just the last line of defense as they used to be, but I'm seeing in a lot of design architectures, passwords are the only line of defense, which means if somebody can break in and get your password, game over pretty quickly. And what I just like to do is start off with always letting offense inform the defense. Because what we're really talking about with cybersecurity is there's hundreds of things we can do, but we want to focus in on the areas that reduce the biggest risks. To put it in non-technical terms, we want to make it harder for the adversary. We want our network design to be defensive friendly, not offensive friendly. So I know there's tons of books and courses and webinars on hacking, But if we really break down some of the recent breaches that have occurred, it's pretty simple. Somebody is going to go in and look and find some visible IP addresses. You can't hack what you can't see. Then they're going to find open ports. You can't hack what you can't get to. And then they're going to find an exposure. They're either going to look for a vulnerability, a patch that hasn't been applied, or they're going to look for an easy to guess password. They're then going to crack the password, take the data, break the crypto keys, and game over. But if you look at this, one of the pivotal areas in which companies are failing is on passwords. I was shocked last year when we heard about a billion-dollar company had over 500 million records compromised, and the way the adversary got in is because they had a username of admin and a password of admin. And I just remember just sitting there looking there going, are you freaking kidding me? I mean, seriously, how in the world can we be making those mistakes today? But unfortunately, companies are. Now, remember, I know a lot of people listening to this webinar going, oh, Eric, we're not that stupid. We would never make that mistake. How do you know? When was the last time you checked all your passwords? Or better yet, do you have centralized password management? Do you have password controls? Do you have visibility? Do you have metrics to understand the strength and security of your passwords? And if you tell me, well, no, then how do you know you don't have a user ID of admin and a password of admin? If you're not tracking, if you're not keeping account, then you really don't know what's there and what's not there. And one of the things I always like reminding folks is, what is the difference between a major breach and a minor breach? Now, I know some people come back and go, oh, Eric, there's really no difference. There actually is. You could have some breaches that, yeah, you find out about it, and you're like, I'll deal with it later in the week. It's not that big a deal. You still go home to have dinner with the family and watch Jeopardy in the evening. I don't watch reruns of NCIS, right, and all that good stuff. And it's not that big a deal. And then there's other breaches where if they occurred right now, you would basically text your significant other and say, I'm not going to be home for 3 days. What's the difference? You give up? The impact to your organization. Now, what drives the impact to your organization? The critical data that was compromised. So if somebody breaks into a system and steals critical information, that's a major breach. If somebody breaks in and doesn't steal critical information, that's a minor breach. Now, how do you get access to critical information? Based on privileged accounts. And what's one of the common mechanisms for compromising those accounts? Breaking the password. So I know when you look at the surface of these attacks and data breaches, it doesn't seem like password is a big problem, but if you drill down into the root cause, it really becomes one of the main or key problematic areas. And just sort of reviewing where this all fits, if we remember our key components of where passwords fit in our security pyramid, it's all about what we call AAA: authentication, authorization, and accountability. Now, yeah, I know if you're looking at the slide, you probably say, hey, Eric, there's an I there. Yeah, we always joke the I is silent. But what you're really talking about with security is you're identifying yourself to a system. You're then authenticating and proving that you are who you say you are. You're then authorizing to perform some action and activity, and then you're held accountable. Now, here's the problem. With most of our clients, they go, oh, we have authentication under control. We have our passwords, we have our management, that's under control, and they focus solely on authorization and accountability. That's problematic because in most organizations, authentication isn't under control. Yes, people have passwords, but they write them down, they use the same password, they don't always change it. By the way, New York pound 10, New York pound 11 are the same password. Oh, sorry, I forget. When I do Beyond Trust webinars, it's my civic duty, because one of the heads of marketing is a Patriots fan, that I always have to support the Patriots. So sorry, my password wouldn't be New York pound 1. It would be Tom Brady sucks 1, Tom Brady really sucks 1, Tom Brady really, really sucks1, right? So those passwords are all the same, right? Because you're just adding a little bit in there. So just going in and tweaking or altering a small amount of information is still that same password. Also, and this is something you don't know, are your users using the same passwords for all their accounts? I recently worked on a case where a CEO had a fairly complex password, and it was compromised with relative ease. And we're all sitting there scratching our heads going, how in the world did this happen? Because it's pretty complex. Password cracking tool is not going to be able to break it. And what it turned out is he used that same password for the last 5 years, and he used it at a university that he was an advisor on, and that university got compromised 3 years ago. You ready for this? He knew the university got compromised, and he never changed his password. He never changed or altered it. So we're seeing that type of problem. Now, I'm always a big fan of metrics and seeing how you're doing. So treat this as a report card. So I'm going to give you an assignment. For each one of these areas, authentication, authorization, and accountability, if you are doing a great, amazing job, give yourself an A. If you're not doing a good job, give yourself a B. And if you're doing a really, really like Tom Brady type of job, right, you give yourself a D or an F and see how you're doing. If you're getting below Bs in any one of these categories, you have work to do. Now, here's the trick. When you give yourself the grade, base it on factual data, not just, oh, I think we're doing okay here. Prove it. Where's the data to support or back it up that you have proper authentication? And then when we talk about the other big area, which is our authorization, we always want to go in, give people least amount of privilege they need to do their job, separate duties and rotate duties. Now, I'm not spending a lot of time on this because I really want to get to the case studies on the passwords because that's what this webinar is about. But I just wanted to include that in for completeness on how we go in and set up proper authorization and manage our access. Now, this is really the meat of what I want to cover. These are the common mistakes made with passwords, privileged accounts, and more importantly, how to avoid them. And I've seen all of these over the last 6 months, and I've seen a lot more. So scenario one, this is just your good old-fashioned weak password. So an attacker finds a web portal that allows someone to get access to your environment. So that's the first question for you. If you haven't asked this question at your organization, you need to ask it. What are all the places that somebody who works at our company or a customer can log in via the internet and get access to sensitive information? If you have a page that says, please enter in your username and password, that is a high risk area. That's a high exposure. You need to know about it, you need to audit, and you need to verify. And here's the issue. With a lot of our clients, 70 or 80% of the web portals for their employees are tied back to Active Directory, are managed or controlled, have password checks. However, you have a few business units or some areas that roll out a new app. They don't want to integrate it or they can't integrate it with Active Directory or their current infrastructure, so they just set up a separate database. That's the ones we worry about. Because I hear clients all the time go, Oric, we take our AD passwords and we do password cracking, we do robust checks, we make sure that all passwords are letters, numbers, and special. Whenever they change it, they always have to be 3 characters different. That's great. But what if you have one application that doesn't utilize AD? What if it's separate and isolated and somebody was able to enter in a weak password? That's what we're worried about. So in this case, an attacker finds that web portal. It asks for authentication. Through account harvesting, they're able to go in and find out some usernames and passwords from other broken accounts. They get the weak password and they log in. Another alternative to this one that we're seeing a lot more today is an attacker finds a web portal and they go to the dark web and they buy credentials for individuals that work at that company. Because what a lot of people don't realize is when our passwords, our user IDs, or critical information is compromised, it's not used right away. It's just harvested and sold, and it's sometimes 3 or 4 years before somebody uses that. A great example is, if you remember, it's now about, I think, 5 years ago that OPM had their information compromised. And just in the last 2 months, we've started seeing some of the information from the OPM compromise being used for scams, for identity theft, and other issues. 5 years later, the information is now being utilized. That's the threat we're up against. So it might not even be that they currently have a weak password. Maybe they're using a password from a similar system that was broken and cracked. So basically, what's failed in these cases is the password controls were not set up. They weren't able to be proactive to find it. Big remediation here is account lockout. If somebody's trying to break in after 3 or 4 times, you want to lock the account. Now, yes, I'm always a big fan of balancing the functionality and the security. And one of my golden rules of security is if security negatively impacts the business, security is wrong. So I'm not saying go in there and make it 2 failed logins and permanently lock for 300 years. Find the balance. In my experience, if somebody's not able to get their password in 5 attempts, they probably don't know it. So I usually do, if you have 5 failed attempts within a 45-minute period, lock the account for 2 hours. I like that. Now somebody goes, but Eric, what about 6 or 7? Great. If you have the data to show me that by increasing account lockout to 7 greatly decreases the number of calls to the help desk, I'm okay with that. Reasonable, sensible increases is okay. Now, if you tell me you're going to make it 700, right, that's not reasonable or sensible, but 5 or 6 is okay. I also don't like to do permanent lockout because it can be a denial of service attack. Now, I fully recognize that some organizations like the Australian government, I love them. They're doing an amazing job with a lot of their controls that they're putting in place. I know that they permanently lock. They say if we think it's a big enough threat that somebody's trying to break in, we want to permanently lock the account. That's okay, but just recognize that there's a little more work on the self-recovery there. And probably the big one is that strong password policy. Make sure that we really have those good, strong passwords in place. Scenario 2, I call the compromised credentials. This is where users do not properly protect their credentials, or the big one that still shocks me is people leave their computers unlocked at hotel, airports, coffee shops. I just worked a case, and I'm just shocked at the things that happened in the year 2018. But somebody had a connection. Their flight was delayed. So they went to the bar at the airport, and they had their computer logged in with very, very sensitive information. They decided they needed to go use the bathroom, and they didn't even lock their computer, let alone left it on the bar, left it unlocked and open, and surprise, surprise, when they came back, it was gone. We just have to do a better job in those areas, because I'll tell you, I can't help you. There's no way to secure stupid. If people are going to do stupid human tricks, right, there's only so much we can do there. So people not properly protecting their credentials. I've also seen cases where people write down their passwords. One case, I was on an airplane, and somebody called up a friend and said, hey, listen, I'm going to be on an airplane. I know my timesheet has to be submitted at 5 o'clock, and I don't want to get in trouble. So can you go in and log in for me? And not only did they give that person their username and password, but anybody sitting on the airplane in hearing distance also heard their username and password. So it's one of those cases we just have to be a lot more careful in controlling and managing access to those credentials. And one of the big ones that you're going to see popping up a lot here is multi-factor authentication, just going in and taking away that single point of failure. Passwords in many cases have almost outlived their usefulness. This idea that we can just have a string of characters and that's going to magically protect and secure our systems is just not a great level. So we want to really look at multi-factor authentication, also screen lockout and other factors to limit access to systems. This is another big one, lost USB drives. I am still amazed today of the sensitive information that people put on unprotected USB drives. I'll go in and just walking through airports or on airplanes to see USB drives fell out of someone's pocket, left on the ground. Now, catch-22 with this one. I would never, ever plug them in because, yes, sometimes if you see a USB in an airport, it's because somebody dropped it and it has a lot of sensitive data. But I'll also tell you that a lot of attackers are also dropping malicious USBs. So as soon as you plug them into your computer, it now infects and compromises your system. Ooh, I need to use that as a new scenario. So next time I give this presentation, I'm going to make scenario 3A. I like that, where you inadvertently plug in a rogue USB, right, into your system, and then that causes compromise. But bottom line is any sensitive information, whether it's on your computer, whether it's on the cloud, or whether it's a USB drive, needs to have proper protection, control, and encryption in place. And then, of course, with all of the syncing of cell phones and laptops and smartphones and iPads and all those IIIs out there and cloud and everything else, we have this uncontrolled data issue where information is constantly being uploaded or synced to locations where we just don't know where that is. And we're seeing this in a lot of these cloud-based services where companies will go in and use the Microsoft Cloud. By the way, this is not an issue at all with Microsoft. This is an issue with the user. So they'll set up Microsoft Cloud, and then a user will go home and log in with their work credentials on a personal computer and automatically sync. And what happens? All of the work data now goes to the personal computer, and all of the personal data now goes to the work computer. And that creates two big problems. One, now all of your sensitive, critical information is now on devices that your company doesn't own and doesn't control. So if that person leaves the company, it's hard to gain control of that. Or sometimes people have information on their home computer that, let's say, is questionable, right? It might violate HR ethics, and if that information is now uploaded to a work computer, that could also start to be problematic. So we start to get this dual reverse role where information, if it's not controlled and managed correctly, can now be accessed very easy, very simply, and in some cases without passwords. And we had this with another client where a lot of their critical, sensitive intellectual property was stolen and put out on the web. And we could not figure out how it happened. And then we finally, after about 9 months of investigation, recognized what happened is somebody on their home computer synced with the work computer and copied all the data down. They got rid of their work computer and they just donated it. They just gave it to a friend or gave it somewhere. They didn't wipe the drive. They didn't clean the drive. And somehow that got into the hands of the adversary and they were able to steal and compromise the data. So it's really important today with all of this new technology and cloud-based backups that we're really understanding, tracking, and really very controlled that any time somebody's going to access sensitive data, it's always through proper authentication and proper passwords. And I don't even know if advanced phishing is maybe giving the adversary too much credit here, because most of the phishing that I see isn't that sophisticated. And I'll tell you, I knew there was a problem 25 years ago. Because 25 years ago, if you remember the I love you virus, the I love you virus was where when you got infected, you sent an I love you message to everyone in your company from your address book. Now, unless you work for a really screwed up organization, if you come into work in the morning and there are 50 I love you messages from coworkers, Isn't that pretty obvious? It's a problem. And I tell people, I'm not a medical doctor. I am a doctor. I'm not a medical doctor. But if it's normal behavior for you to tell all your coworkers you love them every morning, you might need psychological help. And the point is, even in that case, when those messages were clearly and overtly malicious, people still clicked on it. And I remember turning to one of my coworkers and saying, what happens when those emails are legitimate? What happens when those emails are valid? What happens when those emails are coming from bosses, coworkers, or legitimate entities we work in? And that's where we are today. That's the world we live in, where you're going to get an email from an e-commerce or a bank. It looks legitimate. It seems legitimate. And if you don't stop and think and you inadvertently click or open, boom, not only are you compromised, but your passwords and all your information can be stolen. So we also have to be real careful of filtering out dangerous emails, controlling access, and limiting what runs or executes on your system. Then we get into what I call the malicious external. This is the scenario I mentioned in the beginning, where you have somebody external to your organization. They're scanning, looking for visible IPs, open ports, and vulnerabilities. And one of the biggest vulnerability or weak passwords, remember, if your system has 30,000 accounts, I don't need 30,000 weak passwords. I don't need to compromise 30,000 accounts. How many do I need to compromise to get in? You got it, just one. I just need one weak password. So what happens is companies know 90% of what's on their system, but it's that 10% they miss. That's why when I talk to clients, I always say audit all your passwords, not just some of them. Now, what I love about doing webcasts with Beyond Trust is a lot of webcasts that I do for companies, we lay out the problem. We lay out the issue. We lay out what has to be done, but then I just sort of leave them there. What I like with Beyond Trust is they give you a solution. So now that I've gone in and laid out what the problem is, why passwords are so important, why you need that visibility, why you need that metric, instead of just leaving you there, now we're going to give you a real actionable solution from Beyond Trust that you can implement to solve and fix this problem.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sherrick. Just show my screen. So it's very lucky that we actually happen to have a solution for this very problem. Now, it's actually funny you should mention about the I Love You virus, because I actually remember working for a security company, and this was probably, obviously it was when it came out, which was what, 10, 15 years ago, maybe more than that, maybe 20 years. And the CEO of the security company that I was working for was the one that was actually responsible for spreading it to all the employees. I mean, it was just a very bizarre situation. Anyway, so that aside, hopefully you can see my screen okay. Let's actually talk a little bit about what Password Safe does to help a lot of the challenges when it comes to password management. So, first of all, and I always say this, and it comes to be very cliched, but, the best password management system is one where you never reveal the credentials. And the reason I say that is because, when it comes to security, it doesn't matter how long something gets exposed. You can have password changes every hour, every 5 minutes if you want, but even if you're changing it within that time and it gets exposed, it only takes a couple of minutes for somebody to be able to leverage compromised credentials, to be able to get in, to plan something malicious. Like Eric said, it's actually being able to get in and then move around your organization. Typically, hackers don't have a route. They don't say, okay, I'm going to go directly from A to B. I want your point of sale systems. I'm not going to go straight to there. I'm going to look for vulnerabilities. I'm going to try to see if I can leverage some sort of weak chink in your armor. What are the vulnerabilities I can use to get in? Okay, here's actually some artifacts lying around. I'm using Mimikatz. I can actually use those credentials to get me somewhere else. And it's basically they hop around, looking for weaknesses and looking for ways they can get in. So, password management is just basic due diligence. Honestly, everybody should be doing password management these days. So, Now, obviously the use case that you're probably familiar with is somebody needs to be able to get a password, and they go to the password management system and say, "Give me the password." But there's also other things that need passwords, and very often people don't rotate passwords because of these things. And what I'm talking about is things like service accounts, scheduled tasks. Anything that is kind of hard coded, A to A. If I've got applications and scripts, with credentials hard coded in, then generally, just because of the risk at changeover, the time it takes, potential downtime you have to give to those applications when you change those credentials over, very often people don't do it as often as they should do, or if at all. A lot of hard-coded credentials are oftentimes never changed, unfortunately. So, really, the whole basis of around security management is making sure that rotated, but also allowing all the things that need to use those credentials to make sure that there's no operational impact. So, services continue to start. People requesting service accounts, are still able to get them. Applications continue to work. So, as I say, it's all around business continuity at the same time having this umbrella of security around it. Now, we talk about passwords, but there's also SSH keys. Very often, you're as strong as your weakest link. I mean, it's very easy for, Unix, Linux administrators to set up public-private key pairs. And oftentimes they're used in scripts to be able to connect to systems. So, a classic use case I see quite often is, you have admins that need to be able to go in and change something on all the systems. Let's just say message of the day, for example. So they have a script that does it. Now, they don't want to log into 1,000 systems to be able to do that. So they create a public-private key pair. They push a public key out into all of those 1,000 systems in the authorized keys file, and then they just, embed the private key in their script. So it goes through and it just connects and does everything in one fell swoop. Now, again, the downside is these things, when compromised, represent an attack vector where people can get onto a box and then they can look for other stuff to do. So SSH key management is important to be able to lock down as well as passwords. Now, as I said right at the very start of the slide, the best system is where you never give out your credentials, and that's where session management comes into it. Because really it's not just about, traditional use cases like recording activity, but it's logging a user on without revealing the credentials. So if I need to be able to access anything, whether it's a web page, whether it's the Unix Linux system, network device, a Windows system, hypervisor, database, I want to be logged on without ever revealing the credentials. Now that means, again, we actually increase the security posture because there's no element where that's been exposed. So we do that, built into the system. It's not a separate module. It's not something you have to separately license or add on. All of these features are included with the product. Now, the way that it works is what we call credential injection. So basically, user logs onto password safe and says, okay, I need access to this credential, in the security zone or enclave. And then what password safe does is it generates a one-time key. It's like a GUID sent down to the desktop. That's used by your whatever a client you normally use. So for obviously RDP, it'd be MSTSC. Could be Mobile Xterm, Devolutions, Microsoft Remote Desktop Connection Manager, SSH, could be PuTTY, Reflections, Terraterm, again, Mobile Xterm, whatever you use. But it uses that to connect through to the proxy. Now, bear in mind that within that key, it's just a random GUID. There's nothing at this point on your desktop that says what the host name is, what the username, or what the password is. All of that goodness happens in the proxy. So what happens is, basically that GUID connects you to the proxy. The proxy then does all the heavy lifting and then connects you through to that protected resource. Now, as far as the user is concerned, it's completely transparent. And, one of the things that we work very hard on with the product isn't just obviously the background security as you'd expect, but it's the usability. I've been in this space for many, many years, and I've seen so many projects fail in previous organizations that that are really just around the usability of the product. I mean, admins, if something's difficult to use or if something goes against the grain in terms of the way that they normally work, they'll look for workarounds. I mean, there's that sort of classic picture that, was distributed around for ages about, it was a picture of like a sidewalk, and there was a little square of grass. And, and it was showing like, how people you normally expect to walk around this square. But, there was a little, path worn in the middle of this grass diagonally, because people always take shortcuts. It's just the way that we're made. So as much as anything else, the system, the PAM system, has to integrate in with the way that users work in order to be able to use it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to show you, when we get to the demo, some ways in which we make this incredibly easy and almost transparent to operation. Now, obviously from a company perspective, we audit everything that happens, in that session. So it doesn't matter whether it's SSH RDP, whether it's an application session logging on to SQL Server Management Studio, or a web page logging on to the AWS Management Console. Everything is video recorded. There is a log of every single keystroke that is typed and is indexed. Everything that's copied and pasted, even into an RDP session, everything in that paste buffer gets captured and it gets audited. So everything within there, it doesn't matter what happens, you can search on it. And also you can do it in real time. So let's say, for example, your SIM suddenly pops up with an anomaly to say that there's suspicious activity happening, or something that's unusual with an application. You can go into Password Safe, instantly put in the application name, search right across all the active sessions. It'll bring up any active sessions or recorded sessions that, where that's been used. You can click on the session and drill straight down into that point of time where it actually found that activity. And that sort of thing's key, because ultimately, when it comes to this type of thing, is you need to sort out the wood from the trees. We see many instances, with high-level hacks, like Target, Home Depot, etc., where they had systems in place, but there was so much data coming back, but they couldn't really sort of see what they needed to see, or it wasn't necessarily very easy to get to what they need to get to. So, really just being able to index and get it and make it easy for the admin to find is absolutely crucial on this. Now, the other thing that we have, which is a big differentiator, is the ability to add context. It's not always the case that Bob has access, 9 to 5 to this group of systems, Monday to Friday. Very often his role might change. Maybe he has to cover a night shift occasionally. Maybe there are different systems, that he has to log into. Maybe he moves around, different offices. So what we have with our workflow control is the ability to have the access policies look at the time, the day, the date. I mean, there's a calendar built into here, and obviously where they're coming from, looking at the IP address range, who they are and what are they looking for. Now, to give us some context around that, I mean, for the use case, if I'm working a night shift and I have to come in, to my Firewall system, overnight, over the VPN and working from home, then, ultimately I can have a rule that's set up to say, if I'm coming in from this IP address range, which is my VPN concentrators, at this particular date and time, it's going to allow me access only to my Firewall accounts. If I log in using the same credentials during the day from the office, maybe it gives me access to a whole different other range of accounts. So in other words, it's adding some context to how you log in to determine what you get. Now, the other thing as well, as I mentioned, is the fact that we can do this with applications, because it's great to say, yeah, we can do session management to operating systems, but very often you need to be able to log what users are actually doing within those sessions. So again, little example here, we can be managing the vSphere credentials, and then we can launch the vSphere app, whether it's a FAT app, whether it's a web app, playing those credentials automatically and record everything that happens within the session. We can do exactly the same thing for Unix and Linux. We exec the command. So it's not like a person can just jump out of the shell, and sort of come into, like a root shell, for example, if you're running a root. As soon as you exit that SSH session, it basically closes. You cannot exit out. So some use cases there, could be scripts that you want to run on a regular basis without giving somebody shell access. It could be that maybe you have a menu-driven application that you want, to be able to run in order to be able to give access to certain functions. So again, or even, role-based apps, maybe SQL Plus, or maybe you've got some DBMS tool that you're running from the command line. They need to run as root or a privileged account like Oracle or whatever, but you still, want to be able to limit what they can do within the confines of our session. The other big differentiator is reporting analytics, because again, a lot of systems, in this space will have reports that are built around auditing, because let's face it, the reason you're putting this in is because of compliance. Your auditor is saying, I need you to audit everything you're doing, or they're going to come in with your SAT 70 audits, periodically and say, show me all the activity that Bob's done on this system, from this day to this day. But you also need operational reports. You need things that are actually going to tell you when are your password changes coming up, what are your busiest days, where are the potential loads on your system, how are your rules being used? Are they being used appropriately? Have admins of this system created lots of different rules, or are they consolidating it down as they should be and applying those password rules to the right systems? Where are my service accounts being used? How are they distributed? Are people having Windows services started by their own local account, rather than a service account? So in other words, as soon as your local account expires, then, all of a sudden the server's broken. So again, it's giving you that operational insight, into how your system's working. And one of the things that our products includes is a built-in scanner. And it's not just something that goes out and says, yeah, here's your accounts and, here's the status of them, but it drills down into the system. It looks at all of the different operational aspects of it. When was the password last changed? Is it obviously, what is the permissions? When was it last logged onto? Are these stale accounts or backdoor accounts that are there? Even to say, what are the services? What are the processes? Everything about that box, the software is installed, that could be pulled back and enumerated. We also do threat analytics. So again, built in part of the price, it does assessment in terms of unusual or anomalous behavior. And it can also consume feeds from all of our product sets. So it can look at our vulnerability management tool. It can look at least privilege. It can look at password use. It can look at session use, and then use all of those indexes to be able to bubble it up. We could even actually tie in with external solutions out there as well, that actually, will allow you to be able to take these factors in and then understand, is this something that's anomalous, or is it something that, is actually a sanctioned event? So ultimately, the things that makes it different really, as I say, is the adaptive workflow control. We've got the scanning capabilities. There's a full data warehouse and analytics right across the product set and all these different elements. We have these things called smart rules that allow you to be able to dynamically, create ACLs for groups of accounts, groups of systems. If something changes, for example, if there's a server and previously it had SQL Server, someone uninstalls it, our scanner will detect the SQL Server is not installed on it anymore, and then all of a sudden it then drops out of that smart rule group, and DBAs no longer see that system. So again, it's dynamically being able to move systems and accounts in and out of groups according to real-time activity. The biggest thing, everything in here and everything I'm going to show you is included at no additional cost. Now, the reason we do that is you're probably saying, well, why don't you charge for it? All the others do. Is the fact that, to me, like I say, you should never have a password management system without the ability to not release that password. That's just something that is very, very important to me. And so, including session management, all these features means that you're going to put a product in with features you're going to use. It's not something where you're saying, okay, well, we can't afford to do that right now. We're going to look at session management sometime down the road. I would rather a product go out and have all of the capabilities to make something secure, because ultimately that's why you're putting it in. And then lastly, is obviously the usability. Now, as a product manager, of course, I'm going to say, yeah, it's the best thing since sliced bread, but, don't just take our word for it. Talk to the analysts. As you can see, we've got very, very high marks, with Gartner, Forrester, put us to the top of their stack. And a lot of these tests aren't just, analysts going out and just poking around our website and looking for features. Certainly in the Forrester Wave case, that's a 3-month exercise where they're going out, they're using the product. So it's a proper analysis of all the competitors in that space. And so to be placed at that high level, is indeed a very good honor. So let me actually just show you a little bit about how the system works. I'll give you a couple of use cases and then we'll do some Q&A. So let's say, we've actually got some very sort of typical examples. So, generally with a system like this, you'd expect users to go into a portal and, they would select items from a list. And certainly we can do that. We have these things called like one click, that allows you to be able to go in and say, yep, okay, I want to be able to dynamically open a session. But as I mentioned before, admins sometimes, they don't want to go into a web page. They're used to having their own tools. So, for example, MobaXterm, here's something I set up here. We're using really connection strings. So if I wanted an RDP session, then basically, as you can see, I can't move my mouse on it because that would hover it off. But as you can see in the user part, BTLab Canard is me, admin01 is the account that I need, SQL01 is the box that it's located on. So in this case, all I need to do is just double click on that. It's going to prompt me now for my Active Directory credentials. So that it obviously identifies me. If there's two-factor involved, then obviously two-factor would get pushed. Maybe I get a response to my smartphone, to say, authenticate who I am. And I'm logged in. As you can see, it's as simple as that. I mean, it really, you can't get any more different, to, if you like, non-PAM to PAM as this. I can do exactly the same thing with SSH. So see here, admin02, I've got a connection string, BTLab Canard, who's who I am. I want the system called admin2, account on a system called policy, using Beyond Insight to local. So just click this. I'm going to put in my my Active Directory credentials, and this logs me directly onto that SSH system. So if we do, who am I? I'm logged in as admin02. Now the really cool thing is, we haven't just made it easy for users, but from an admin perspective, if we take a look at the admin side and go to the menu, I can take a look at all the active sessions. So let's say, for example, I've received some alerts to say that there's some users going in. So on the one hand, I can take a look at this particular session. I can see that, obviously the user's gone in here. If I bring up MobaXterm, I'm going to park it over here, you'll see that, I can get to my menu. Everything that I do is recorded, so I can see everything that happens on the screen. Everything that I did, I left clicked on this, the window open start, I left clicked on the Explorer. Again, this is indexed, this could be searchable. If need be, we can show timestamps. And when you look at a recording, you can actually go backwards and forwards through it, just like a YouTube video, I guess. So now in this case, I mean, the really cool thing is we've got something that's called lock. So if I've detected suspicious activity, I can now lock the session, and what we'll see, what the user gets is a lockout screen. Now, the session's still going on in the background. I'm still connected to RDP. You can still, the countdown timer is still going. But the difference is with this, it means that I can no longer do anything. So basically, you can customize this lock screen. You could say, contact the help desk, suspicious activity detected, or I could figure out, is this person doing what they should do? If it's okay, well, I just go in and unlock, and the user carries on about the business. I can do exactly the same thing with SSH. It makes no difference whatsoever. If I open up an SSH session, you see I've still got the same ability to be able to lock everything that happens within that session. As you can see, who am I, admin2, everything is there in real time. I can search standard in, standard out. Now, the other nice thing is we can also, do an analysis, when it comes to the replays, because, there's really like a hidden area that the people don't usually give a lot of thought to. And that's when they think of data breaches, they always think of the admins that are doing the work, but they don't always think of the person that's doing the reviewing. For example, I could go in here as a reviewer and I could open up a session. I could start playing back all the activity, and I could jump around. I could search for activity. I know that a user went into a folder called Tom, and I could jump to that point in recording. Now, what if I, discovered sensitive information here? It wasn't anything to do with the admin that did the work in the first place. It was a reviewer. So what we do is we audit the auditor. So what you'll see here is everything that happens, anybody that touches this recording is audited. Even to the point where, for example, if I have to create a snapshot, let's say, for example, for forensics, we actually want to be able to do a screen print to say, here's something that happened. I can generate a snapshot. Here's my JPEG. Again, everything gets put in that audit trail. I could add comments. I can say, okay, Bob needs to review, and I could actually put that in there. So again, you see frameworks export is in there. I've now got a log. Bob can go in, he can take a look at it. If Bob thinks it's okay, then, Bob, he at least needs to play it to open up the comments, and he can say, yep, you know what, it's approved, mark it as reviewed, save and close. Okay, so now you've almost got like a to-do list for your reviewer as well. You can see exactly, what actually needs to happen on this. So hopefully what you can see with here is, with password management, we're trying to give you like privilege without the pain. So, it allows you to be able to do what you need to be able to do, rotate the credentials, but at the same time, not break your existing processes or not alienate the admins who you want to embrace this new type of technology. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Sarah for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Martin. Okay, guys, at this point, it's time to launch our second poll of the session. So let me get that up on the screen, then we'll jump into questions. Would you like to schedule a more thorough or personalized one-on-one demo, or even a conversation about PowerBroker Password Safe or any of our PAM solutions? And that conversation would be with a security expert here at Beyond Trust. So if you would like to have a deeper conversation, select yes, and then somebody will be in contact with you. Okay, let's jump into a couple of questions before we hit the top of the hour. Eric, make sure you're off of mute. Let's jump into a question for you. So are there any risks or exposures with using multi-factor authentication?
The big issue with multi-factor authentication is typically there had to be a token that somebody had to carry around. So a lot of companies and a lot of banks didn't really want to be in the token business. So that was problematic. But now that we can use apps on our smartphones, or we can go in and use texting, really a lot of those risks are minimized. But the big thing is just really making sure that that token or device is protected. If I give somebody my cell phone and unlock it for them, and I'm using text one-time multi-factor, that could be an exposure point. So it's really just making sure whatever device is used is protected, controlled, and managed.
Eric, can you also explain the difference between multi-factor authentication and two-factor authentication?
Sure. So if you remember the slide I gave on the types of authentication, where it's something a password, something you have a token, something you are biometrics, or someplace you are, multi-factor authentication just says using multiple methods to authenticate. So you don't just use a password, you would use a token in a password or a biometrics in a password. And two-factor is just a subset of multi-factor that says we're only going to use two factors. So in most cases, two factors is usually what's used. So two-factor and multi-factor are really synonymous terms, mainly in the industry.
Eric, how do you handle management that refuses to give up privileged accounts even though they don't need them for job function?
You go to a sporting goods store, you buy a baseball bat, you go in their office and you beat the crap out of them. No, sorry, was that my outer voice? Sorry. That method, by the way, would work. It's just not legal in most areas. Now, if you work in Bogota or Colombia, then that could actually be a suitable method. The more serious one, and hopefully you didn't take notes on that, is to go in and educate them, is to go in and say, okay, here's the exposure that you represent to the organization. Here's the overall risk. Do you really want to accept it? And have them sign off on it. When I go into execs and I have a piece of paper that says, listen, if you want to keep that privileged account, you can, but I want you to sign off that you're accepting the risk. 9 times out of 10, they say, take the account away.
For Martin, do you recommend in-house or external key management? I think this comes in from Martin. This came in when you were speaking, Martin, but Thomas, if it's for Eric, please let me know too.
So, I mean, really, in-house, can sometimes be a little bit more expensive than running it as a service. But, if you are big enough to be able to support that, then there's obviously a lot to be said for, keeping it under an umbrella is very close to you. So if you have an HSM, it's definitely preferable to have something inside the corporate perimeter. But I mean, key management is really just something. As long as you regularly rotate keys and remember that keys are the same as passwords. I mean, they're bits that if they become compromised can give people access to things. So it's really just exercising common sense about their use. But yeah, to me, I would say probably on-prem is preferable from my standpoint.
Another one for you, Martin. Can you have more than one person check out an account?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, there's different use cases. So, for example, if it was a local account, like it was a local account on a Windows system, then, you might be restricted to, 2 or 3 RDP sessions, because of terminal service restrictions. If there's something like an Active Directory account that you're using to log on to, multiple systems, or if it's like an SSH account, then yeah, absolutely. You can set limits to say how many people can access account concurrently, but fully supports that.
Okay, time for one more question. So Martin, we've had SecureLink for a few years as a VPN replacement with improved audit of the support session. Does BeyondTrust also replace that vendor-oriented platform, or can it work with SecureLink in managing accounts utilized by vendors?
I'll need to look into the specific use case, about how you're using SecureLink. But I mean, when it comes to providing access to remote vendors, it absolutely can, to an extent, replace it. I mean, I would still always recommend use a VPN. So you need a VPN in order to be able to, to connect a vendor to your remote proxy, because they're going to have to RDP directly in, obviously, through the proxy. But that there are other mechanisms as well. If it's a big enough vendor, you can also actually put a node actually on the vendor site and have them connect through there. So again, depending on the use case, possibly.
Okay, guys, it is time to wrap it up. Thank you so much for attending today, you guys. We really appreciate you being here, spending the last hour with us, and also submitting all of your questions. A reminder that you will receive a follow-up email, and it will contain links to the recording and the slides shown here today. It will be in a PDF format within 1 to 2 business days from now. And also, if you are attending for CPEs with ISACA, please make sure you download it within the handout section now. It's your attendance verification document. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Martin. We love you guys. Is that okay for me to say?
We love you too.
We love you too. Group hug, group hug.
Thank you guys so much for being here today, and we will see you at the next one. Take care, everybody, and goodbye.